number 15 is the Devils. So the Devils is a very interesting card. Actually, it's my favorite. Why? Because it represents, to me, it represents extremism, fanaticism, materialism, intolerance, and all these things, extremism, fanaticism, materialism, intolerance, they all lead to subjugation, to enslavement. And that's why it's such an interesting card. It's a warning of what can happen. And that's number 15, the Devils. Oh, and the Hebrew letters, John Maurice, the Hebrew letters Ayin, and in Hebrew Ayin means an eye. So, you've heard of the evil eye. There you go. Number 16 is the lightning-struck tower. The lightning-struck tower, it's an interesting card. It represents destruction before undertaking reconstruction. Something has to be destroyed before you can create. It can mean the end of a certain way that you've lived, and a decision to live another way. It can be moving from one place to another. It can mean loss of your home and looking for another place and finding another place. But it always means destruction before construction. It also points to a danger of overweening ambition and pride and necessitating a change in outlook or attitude. A very good example of the lightning-struck tower, and I think that was the origin of it, was the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, when people were trying to rise ever higher and higher and to reach the gods, to be like a spaceship going into space, going higher and higher and higher. And what happened? A bolt of lightning destroyed it all. So that is a lightning-struck tower. Beware of overweening ambition. The two letters, one is the beginning of a word and the other is the end of the same letter. Pei and face or feet, which is the final. And the pei usually in Hebrew stands for face. Face. So you have to face the consequences of what happens. When something is destroyed, when something that you valued is destroyed, and how you face that, and how you recreate your life. So that is the lightning-struck tower. 17 is the star. The star represents naked truth. She's naked because she's naked truth. She represents, always shown as a young woman. And it shows as a young woman who has two vessels, in one in each hand, and she pours water. One, she pours water onto a body of water, and the other she pours water onto land. And it's kind of interesting because it represents the flowing of energy from the cosmos. See, there's a Milky Way above her. So it's the flowing of energy from the cosmos to Earth. So the pouring of water represents replenishing and nourishing the Earth. And also, when she pours it into water, she's acknowledging that water comes from water. There's water above and water below. And it represents good fortune, inspiration, idealism, unity and hope. And above all, it represents connection between the sublime, what is above, and the material world. So that's the star. It's a lovely, lovely sign to have. Letter Tzadi. And again, it's one of these letters that has a beginning and an end that's the same, but looks different. The letter Tzadi in Hebrew means tzayid. It means something that you fish or you hunt. Or it also stands for justice. Tzedek. So Tzadi is a very important letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It has several meanings. Number 18, the moon. The moon represents subconscious forces. It represents hidden dangers. It represents receptivity. It's a feminine sign, feminine energy. water is also associated with the feminine energy. Water represents fertility and feminine energy, receptivity. Because it's the night and it's illusion, because it's the night and it's the moon, it also represents illusion and imagination. And I want you to notice that there's a connection between the moon and the high priestess, because they both have to do with subconscious forces of imagination and illusion. And unlike the high priestess, the moon also represents hidden dangers, what lurks inside the water, under the water. So I think you can see that there's some images that show you life coming out of the water. So it's also a source of inspiration, and it also is a card that denotes the nurturing of creative actions. So the moon is also the principle, a feminine principle, feminine energy, which is yin, because of its receptivity, because of water, because of what's under the water, because of the subconscious forces. These things are all feminine principles, and that's a yin. Kuf represents, in Hebrew, the kuf is, the Hebrew word for it is kodkod, and kodkod is the head. And if you look at the letter, it sort of looks like a head. Like the head, the back of the head, and the stem is like the neck and the body. So the kuf is the head, which means the thoughts that goes inside your head. After the moon comes the sun, and the sun is in the show. And the sun represents, how can it not represent, positive and active energy. It represents joy. It represents success. It represents masculine authority. And that, I think it has to do also with Apollo, because the sun was the sign of Apollo, and Apollo was a god of creativity and masculine energy and power. So the sun has something to do with Apollo. Don't forget that tarot goes back hundreds and hundreds of years and borrowed from a lot of cultures. So the sun is positive energy, success. It's opposite to the moon in the sense that the moon is yin, feminine energy, and the sun is yang, masculine energy. Success, authority, joy, material abundance, friendship, harmony, self-confidence, triumph over adversity. I wish the sun in every one of your lives. Great, great card. Number 20, and this is the penultimate card. Number 20 is judgment. Judgment is interesting. It's the fulfillment of knowledge of yourself, of self-knowledge, understanding yourself. After a certain point in life, when you have gone through all these different milestones in life, you come to a point where you finally know who you are. You understand yourself. And acceptance. You accept who you are and what you've done and what you failed to do and what you have achieved. So the judgment is a fulfillment of knowledge of self. It's also an acknowledgement from your peers. It's a spiritual rebirth and triumph over some ordeal that you've gone through, and you've passed that. And it's the time to survey one's life and to benefit from that knowledge, to realize the course of one's whole life and be able to judge yourself and what you've done. That's quite an achievement. So judgment is a card of achievement, achieving self-knowledge. That's a huge, huge thing. Some people go through their whole life and never achieve that. So that's the judgment card. That's number 20. And the final card, the ultimate card, is the world or worlds, number 21. Now the worlds is the best card you could ever have. Although judgment is very good and the sun is wonderful. And so is the star. But worlds, wow. Worlds is a cosmic dance of movement, of growth, of change. It's a symbol of unity with the cosmos. It's a symbol of success, of joy, of material and professional acceptance, and spiritual transcendence. It's the culmination and realization of one's hopes and aspiration. It represents the achievement of spiritual ascendance and of peace. The Hebrew letter is the letter Tav, and Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is the final letter. It's the final culmination of everything. It's the end. So there's nothing more to say about the letter Tav. It's the end. Like Aleph is the beginning, Tav is the end. I use the cards as a bouncing, as something to start with, but very rarely do I ever do a sketch. Sometimes I've done some collage. I played with the images by cutting pieces of paper and then painting on them and so forth. And some of them are there, some of my studies.
Were those done after or before?
Before, well before. And only then, after having done some of the studies, I said, why am I spending so much time doing these studies? They take almost as long as doing the painting. Let me go right to it and paint. And so from the studies, I would right away see what worked for me on the canvas and what didn't. Because what you're doing with a collage is very different. You're cutting out basic shapes and you're rearranging them and so forth. Whereas in painting, you can push the paint in any way you want and it's more fluid. So after a while, after having done several of these studies, in which I use sometimes fabric, sometimes beads, sometimes just paper, and I'd cut them up and put them together for the image. And then I said, no, I'm going to paint directly. So that's a good question, though. It was a very good question about do I do studies before. Sometimes I did with the collages, and sometimes I would just draw on the canvas, Jeff. Just like I asked you to do, just block out the shapes, and then get onto it,
Use the whole canvas.
Use the whole. Have you noticed I try to use the whole canvas? I'm always telling you to use the whole canvas.
Good advice.
Yeah, because what's above is just as interesting as what's below. Look at that hangman. He's pointing above and say, pay attention to what's there and what's the material world, the spiritual world and the material world. So they're both just as important. And what happens in the sky is just as interesting as what happens in the earth.